Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. Today I have the great pleasure of having a man who I've known for an awful long time, a good friend of mine, but also a man who has managed to get 2 patents on a religious icon. This is one of the patents. Incredibly, Crichton Miller has managed to get patents on the Celtic cross, a device, a religious icon that we see all over the world, in Wales, in Ireland, in Scotland, and I've just come back from Norway where we saw them everywhere, on top of serpent churches and even on great cathedrals. Crichton has actually written a best-selling book, The Golden Thread of Time, which is a stunning read and really important that people read this. And we also did a film together called The Cross of Thoth, which is a really good watch, and you'll be able to see that on Edge Media TV. Crichton's also extensively lectured, not least of which being invited to lecture at Cambridge University to peers. So it really does have some excellent background to this, and it's provable stuff. So I am very pleased to welcome Crichton. Crichton, thank you so much for coming on my show. I really do appreciate it. The first question, of course, is obviously, how on earth and why did you patent the Celtic cross?
Well, it's a long story, really, but the end up, I guess, is that the patent is probably the toughest kind of peer review you can get.
Right.
And since there's very little in the field of archaeoastronomy, or the field in which I work, which started out as an amateur thing, if you like, to making a discovery, I thought that was the best way to go. So it was quite surprising to me to be granted not 1 but 2 patents on this instrument.
Yes, incredible.
Now, the cross then has turned out in the sense of the British Patent Office as being an instrument capable of astronomy, navigation, and surveying, which of course are the 3 basic principles of our civilization, and incorporate the mathematics of our civilization. In fact, even the mathematics that sent us to the moon.
But I mean, your background in this is you are an expert navigator anyway, aren't you?
I like to think I'm expert. Stop me hitting the rocks. But yes, I have sailed and used sextants, and so I understand the principles of navigation or astronavigation using the stars, and that was a great help to me.
Especially, I mean, sextant strikes me as being something that's almost part of the Celtic cross. It seems to be a sectional.
Yes, and probably a little bit in advance, but the sextant means a 6th or a 60th part of a circle.
Yeah.
And so what we're really looking for in terms of answering the mysteries of ancient people, how did they build stone circles, how did they build the great pyramids across the world,
and how did they get around the world?
Yeah, and how did they, navigate the oceans of the world? A lot of people who are not sailors don't appreciate that in most cases, unless there are mountain ranges, the moment you're 3 or 4 miles offshore, you have nothing to see but sea and sky.
Yeah.
And so they don't appreciate that navigation is necessary just for going coast to coast.
You can't measure water. So
absolutely,
you would have
it's
to
moving all the time. And so what the ancients had to do to be able to overcome that was to be able to measure the position of the sun during the day and measure the position of the moon against background stars at night.
So how did you come to this?
Well, I came to this really by trying to resolve the problem of how the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, purely from a curious point of view, and because I wanted to understand if there had been any earth shifts, to see how they could be aligned to the North Pole Star. Well, of course, a lot of people don't realise that the North Pole Star that we have now, called Polaris, isn't the pole star that the Egyptians had when they built the Great Pyramids.
And why is that?
Well, because of a phenomenon called precession of the equinoxes, or lunisolar precession, which means the Earth wobbles. And just to demonstrate that for you, I've brought a special globe that I've made.
Okay.
And the special globe that I've made shows not just the rotation of the Earth itself, which is very important with a background of stars, but also that the Earth, over a period of 25,920 years, actually changes where the North Pole points at.
It's like a wobble.
It's a wobble, and it wobbles through, which is quite interesting, it wobbles at 23.4 degrees, Newton said it was 46.8 degrees arc that was described in the sky by lunisolar precession.
Right.
The effect of that is that it moves the celestial pole. In other words,
from our perception, the planet.
Yes, in a way, what it means is that the north pole of the Earth carves a circle through the stars. Very interestingly, though, there's been no pole star until the 14th century, since 2800 BC.
And which was it then?
And then it was Alpha Draconis, or in the Draconian constellation.
Right.
Which is the only permanent thing that we have. I think the movement
is this
around
one of the reasons why on Celtic Cross, I mean, one of the things that I noticed greatly in Norway was the fact that the Celtic cross over there seemed to always be the dragon or the serpent.
Dragon or serpent is a world and absolutely essential for understanding the principles of time. I don't know if many people realise that the word temple means place of measurement of time, from tiempo, tempo, and so forth. So
it's a very sacred thing then, measuring time,
it's a very
measuring
sacred
planets.
thing. And in fact, anything, one would say that the use of the cross outside the temple would make it profane.
Yes, I'm reminded of the Egyptians, for instance, who we break things down today, don't we, into sciences.
Yes.
But to the Egyptians, it seemed to be there was a priest astronomer, a priest doctor.
That is correct.
It was always a sacred thing that was being done.
Up until the 17th century, in Europe, there was a combination between the church and the crown, and because the crown, the kings were called rulers, which means measurers, and supported. So what you had is a kind of science, a hidden science for the elite, which allowed the ruling, in combination with spirituality. And the spirituality came from the understanding and measuring of nature itself.
Yes.
And of course, we bring us back to the cross then. So an example of the cross would be...
so this is very much like you would see it in stone, but you've recreated it in wood.
Yeah, this is one I made earlier.
Sticky back plastic.
Yes, and indicatively what you have here is the 4 seasons, which is from those two there. What's quite interesting on it is that on this particular one we have the sign of the 8, which of course is the eternal number.
Yes.
It's infinity. But what's not recognized, of course, is that 360 degrees around a circle, which was used by the Mesopotamians and also by the Egyptians, is almost equal to 365 days in a year. So consequently, the idea behind a Celtic cross is that it should actually spin. Okay, so it spins on 2 occasions.
I mean, that image is just going to blow people away, because we've all been seeing this thing in stone.
Well, they see it as a gravestone, and it's put on a grave for a purpose. Those that were Gnostic or knowledgeable put it on the grave as an instrument for people to navigate their way to heaven, and heaven is the stars, of course.
Now, I see a very historical link there. You use the word Gnostic.
Yes.
And this has become a Celtic symbol to us.
Yes.
And of course, the Celtic Church,
Yes.
We know probably came from early Gnostics or Essene.
Yes.
So this is some kind of hidden wisdom, maybe.
It's a hidden wisdom, an ancient one that I can trace back at least 36,000 years.
36,000 years?
Yes, and it had to do with hunter-gatherers during the Ice Age being able to measure time to move in their boats to head off herds of the annual herds and follow them to hunt them and gather them.
So you're saying that this device, or a device similar to this, has been used for at least 36,000 years?
Certainly there are images of it even 1,400 BC in Scandinavia, carved in glyphs on the rocks with ships. So you see this symbol.
The link between navigation and the symbol.
Navigation, absolutely essential, because to tell the time, you need to tell the time to be able to navigate. And to navigate, you need to be able to use the stars, as the Polynesians have proven. They could find tiny islands just by using grid references of stars at the right time of the year. So to learn this technique required a lifetime of being trained by previous experts or masters.
Like the Sufi Baraka, the wisdom is passed on from one to the next.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So the idea then is what we would call astrology, or astrological symbols, meaning astrologic, meaning mathematics of the stars rather than astronomy, which is naming of the stars.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's become named as pseudoscience because of the foolishness of astrologers, and the fact that they don't measure the stars. So we'll talk about ancient astronomers.
Yeah.
So ancient astronomers then named the stars by making constellations, draw the dots, if you like, draw the lines between the dots to make animal features from their animistic.
Which is good for memory.
Absolutely. So they could pass it, well, look at the shape of that, that's a lion.
Yeah. That's good for teaching.
Yeah.
Good for memory.
And the Mesopotamians, 2,500 BC, created some of those symbols that we still use today, like Leo, Scorpio.
Yeah. And they're seen on a wheel.
And they're seen on the wheel, and they're named into symbols now. So at the top of here we have a symbol which they call the fleur-de-lis, which is on the top of all navigational sea charts. And it's quite ancient. It goes way back. In fact, they've got one in the Vatican. But that's similar, if you look, to this symbol here, which is the Aryan symbol for Aries. Yeah. Okay, and called point of Aries at the rising point of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of the fleur-de-lis, it's this with an additional point.
So how does this bear any relation?
Well, it has great connection to the pyramids, which I'll come to later if you wish to discuss that.
Well, yeah.
How the pyramids were built.
Yeah, let's get back to the pyramids, because this is where you first started with.
Yes. Well, I started with the pyramids because I wanted to find out how they were aligned. We all know that there was an astrological or a star cult society that lasted 5,000 years, living in balance without causing mayhem and changing their systems for so long. And of course that was why the row about Amun was. But a lot of people don't realise that the priests of Amun were actually the priests of Amen, and we still call on Amen at the end of the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. So what we're actually calling on is the return of the age of Aries when we say Amen. It doesn't mean so say all of us.
Which is the symbol you've just shown us.
Correct.
So
and that is Aries.
Of this symbol?
The symbol is that's the Aryan sign. But during the building of the Great Pyramids, 2160 to 2800 BC, this would be the time of the age of Aries, whereas we still now live, believe it or not, in the age of Pisces. We've got about another 70 years to go before it becomes the age of Aquarius.
Oh, right, so the 70s are all wrong then.
Very difficult, because the astrologers who call these ages, the astrologers who call these ages are operating on Greek charts, and they forgot to take precession into account, which I showed you earlier with the moving globe. So the charts that they use are whole 30 degrees out of date, one whole star sign. Right. So those that think they're a Virgo or a Leo and
so they need to get back to what you said before, measuring the stars.
Yes, well, very important, because even Moses said it, when they built a fatted calf, which was the sign of the bull, that they were living in the age of Aries. He got furious and threw the stones at them and killed a few of them by stoning and so forth, for not living in the moment, but for living in the past.
Yes.
Which was
many messages in there.
Many messages in there. Yeah. So going back, so they were able, and this is very important because there's a philosophy behind this. Not only were they using science to measure the earth and to measure angles and to create mathematics, which is a scientific instrument and symbol, they were also putting the philosophy behind what the understanding the nature of time meant. In other words, the nature of cause and effect. Hence, most of our religious texts tell us how to behave based on the laws of cause and effect, which we seem to have forgotten in the modern world.
So this is how the sacred and the literal
mesh together.
Yes,
with this archetypal instrument. Yeah. Now, of course, you mentioned sextants earlier on. In fact, you just put that away. You mentioned sextants earlier on, and they used quadrants and sextants as a deference to the circle. In other words, quadrant means a quarter
We've
part
got about
of
a
a
minute left, so...
I'm sorry. So what happened was, because it was banned to use this religious icon for many years, they invented this, which is called an astrolabe. And the astrolabe has exactly the same principle, designed into four, but it doesn't have a stick on it, so it doesn't look like
a crucifix. Star.
Astrolabe meaning measuring the stars, and even Chaucer talked about that in his treatise to an astrolabe. He knew the world was round, and that was back in the 14th century. So that could be read by anybody.
Fascinating stuff. So the astrolabe was used...
Yeah. But basically...
It's still used today?
Yes, basically what I made is a modern instrument. And the modern instrument shows the cross as a protractor, which is what it really is. And it's able to measure spherically.
I mean, that protractor, that piece of plastic that you've got is incredible. And if this thing really is so clever and accurate, surely it's something that everybody on the planet should know about, in case there's some natural disaster or suddenly our GPS systems don't work. We all really need to know how this thing works. So kindly explain.
Okay, that's a good statement because, in fact, GPS system works exactly the same way.
Does it really?
Yeah, a GPS is a satellite based in the sky from which we bounce a signal back, and then we relate the angle of that signal to the centre of the Earth, and that by bisecting the Earth's surface shows us where we are.
I didn't know that.
Now, that's exactly what the ancients did with this instrument, except they used stars instead of a GPS system. You required a little more brain power, and it also required a clear sky, which is pretty tricky on a
satellite's a bit further away.
Absolutely. So a satellite is far more efficient, but exactly the same principle. So if you think about the cross then as being a receiver, and that the user then would be able to work out by eyeing along the crossbar the angle of a star in the sky in relation to the centre of the Earth, thus bisecting the Earth's centre and showing the latitude.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the centre of the Earth, the gravity that pulls, that's another constant?
Yes, it is. And the constant, the most important thing behind that is the idea of a plumb line. I remember when we were talking earlier on, I mentioned that the centre part of the draconis symbol or the actual constellation in the sky was constant. Well, it is. It's the North Pole of the Sun, and it only varies about half a degree over 180,000 years.
That's the only one, isn't it?
It's the only one because
so we have
the Earth's pole moves all the time. So in the serpent, giving serpent knowledge, which is serpent knowledge is about time. The whole idea behind the serpent giving to Eve the apple of the fruit, if you like, not an apple, but the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, is a relevance to time itself. So we're saying it is the Draconis constellation that gave to Eve the ability to plan ahead with agriculture or with hunter-gathering, which produces a fruit.
That makes so much sense.
A fruit of the tree of knowledge of time. Good and evil is time.
They suddenly knew their time, didn't they?
Yes, and of course they explained in archaic language the idea of good and evil. What they actually meant is order and chaos. So order and chaos, darkness and light are all the symbols that we use for good and evil. So consequently, it is the fruit of the tree of knowledge of order and chaos, or in other words, the understanding of time. And it's time that gave us. That's why this is another sacred symbol that's used in the temple.
Incredible stuff. How accurate is this thing?
This is, in terms of accuracy, this small handheld one is only accurate to half a degree. Well, that's not very much if you wanted to translate that onto the Earth's surface. Well, what it means is you could only find your location on the Earth to within 30 miles at the equator.
Okay.
However, I went back to the Egyptian pyramids and found that there was an instrument there which was known as the Dixon relics.
Right.
And it was found in 1872 by a man called Wayman Dixon, sent in a cigar box to the Piazzi Smythe, who was the Astronomer Royal of Scotland, and lingered there until the late 1990s, where it was recovered, and parts of it now lie in the British Museum. What it was a plumb bob. Now, a plumb bob, of course, always points to the centre of the Earth, and as you know, the Egyptians were very into plumb bobs for balance and truth and so forth. And weighing of goods.
There's a sacred relation again.
And there's a sacred relation, and of course it's in the weighing of the heart ceremony. So the plumb bob tells you whether or not your heart is heavier than a feather. If it's heavier than a feather, you're going to be reconstituted on the earth. If your heart is lighter than the feather of mat, of truth, honesty and justice, then of course you can find your way to heaven. So in the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber, where the soul shaft, as Dr. Hazahi Oas has called it for many years, was these parts of this instrument, which fell out in 1872, which nobody knew they were. So what I did, as part of the patent and part of the experiment, is I reconstructed them. And today I've got an example of one of those. But before I tell you about that, what I wanted to say is one of the items that came out apart from the plumb bob was the Aries hook, which they thought was part of the opening of the mouth ceremony. But in fact, the Aries hook is made of bronze because it's reflective. And it's perfect for viewing the stars. And so what they would have done, when an observer at night, so as not to obscure their eyes, would have lit a dim light or torch in the background and been able to hold this against the stars and... bronze and pinpoint the star
This reminds me
perfectly.
of Moses raising the brazen serpent
Yes, absolutely.
to
And
guide his people.
well, the whole idea to raise the cross of the brazen serpent in the desert was for those people who were poisoned, was that would cure the poison. So that's true of most things. Serpent poison cures serpent poisoning.
If
and
it
of
works,
course,
it works on every level.
the problem is, yes, it works on every level. And of course, if you've been misled or lied to and so forth from generation to generation, then in effect you're poisoned, and that can affect
Yes.
the whole of society.
Yes.
In case of the blind following the blind, then they all run off the precipice, don't
So
they?
it's time now for some truth. So
Well, I
found
think it's time for some
you
truth.
found this as part of the Dixon relics, and what did it tell you?
Well, what it told me from the Dixon relics is that in the construction of the Great Pyramid, which includes the numbers of the moon and the sun and so forth, is that an instrument was required that was more accurate than the Celtic cross, which I just showed you.
Right.
And the instrument, when I constructed it, was accurate to 3 arc minutes. And that means at the level of where we are now in the Northern Hemisphere, you could find your position to within 1.5 miles on the Earth's surface, which is within view of the horizon.
That's incredible accuracy for a...
Incredible accuracy.
So-
And so, well, interestingly, it's three. I've come to, but it's 3 arc minutes out, which is exactly what the pyramids are. The pyramid
Really?
complex at Giza, according to Cambridge University, is only 3 arc minutes out, which is exactly the accuracy of this instrument, which I made to scale. May I show you
But
this?
that's incredible backing for...
Oh, tremendous support
Oh,
for the
we've got to
instrument.
see
This is a real working
Let's take a look there.
instrument.
So we've got something here which looks very much like the standard Christian Latin cross, but tilted.
Yes, and what you have is a plumb line, so that the scale, which is across the middle,
Yeah.
is bisected by the plumb line. So if the cross is angled to measure any angle in the star, then the plumb line will accordingly move and read it off. And this is accurate to 3 arc minutes.
Notice that the lines actually veer outwards.
Yes, they do, because the clever part about what the Egyptians did is they took a wheel or a circle of 360 and splayed it, so that it was like 1/4 of a circle was used, which gave huge accuracy. So to get a circle that would allow this kind of measurement, it would be something like 10 feet in diameter. So this was a great technological step forward for the
Yeah.
Egyptians, and that's what allowed them to be able to tell the time to within seconds, and also to be
And
able
so-
to build these pyramids to a 52 degrees angle.
The Dixon relic then, where are we saying that
The
this was-
Dixon relic would have been fitted to the top of the spar. So in
and it
effect what you have
perfectly
is
holds the line of the plumb.
perfectly holds the line of the plumb. And so that, of course, is I've written extensively about in my book with all the references and so
Yeah.
forth, so people can find that out for themselves. But one must always remember that the cross we're talking about with the plumb line is called an inclinometer, and that you could not possibly build anything that had an incline on it without an inclinometer.
Right.
There has been no finding of an inclinometer until I reinterpreted the Dixon relics of
So
1872.
not only have you patented the Celtic cross
Yes,
twice,
yes,
you've reinterpreted what the Celtic cross is,
Yes.
did,
Yes.
and even the sacred nature of that. You've
Yes.
now basically explained how they managed to create something so incredibly accurate as the Great Pyramid at Giza
yes.
through very, very similar devices.
Very simple devices, but a tremendous amount of brain power, and also a tree of knowledge
Yeah.
from their ancestors all the way down onto how to use astronomical symbols in the sky and to be able to interpret them correctly and measure time. Click, click, click.
Yes, one big question a lot of people will want to know is
Yeah.
basically, that's a cross, that's a Christian cross. Sit down here.
Yes.
It looks very much like a Christian cross. Of course, to a great many people around the world, there's a man pinned to it.
Yes, there is. And I guess if you wanted to interpret what happens to humanity, each one of us has to face death. Few of us ever see it because it's only our relatives that see us dying, but they perceive us fixed in time, disappearing back into the past. Well, of course, we know that there's no such thing as past, otherwise energy would be wasted, and nature doesn't do that. However, that's the perception. So the perception of the death of Christ is that he would be fixed and unable to move, neither with his feet on the earth nor his head in heaven, fixed in that moment of his death on the instrument that actually represented timekeeping. It is not a wrist as in your, like a wristwatch or a clock. previous to the 14th century, then the only instrument that they had that was capable of measuring time was a quadrant or an octant or a wheel cross earlier, which became a religious symbol, apart from the Antikythera mechanism, of course, which really is an anomaly.
Well, I mean, my mind's kind of racing to many other things now. You look at images of, say, for instance, Quetzalcoatl.
Yep.
Or Kukulkan from the Mayan
Also
Aztecs,
pinned to a cross.
who is also pinned to a cross.
Yes.
So there again, and in many other images, Odin, for instance.
Well, it's the promise of rebirth.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so sacred, because the pinning of Christ to the cross is he rose after 3 days, but so does the sun come back after 3 days standstill on the solstices.
So yet again, this religious
bringing
device
life back
is actually very much related to many things such as fertility, navigation, measurement, construction now as well.
Yes.
So reinterpretation completely of religion as we know it.
Well, the concept is to understand the nature of time so that you live in balance and harmony with nature itself. But also to what they believed and they tried to put across was that you should have no fear of death, since everything around you recycled and everything is cyclical rather than linear, then should you be.
Is there any...
That would be enough.
How would people find out more about this cross? Because there'll be a lot of people out there who'll probably want to get one.
Well, they can go to my website, crichtonmiller.com. They can, of course, watch the Cross of Thoth, and a lot of people don't understand what the connection between the Celtic cross and the Cross of Thoth. Well, Thoth was the Egyptian god of wisdom, of measurement, of astronomy, of writing. And, of course, these principles that we've talked about today require not just a knowledge of astronomy, they require the knowledge of writing so as to make almanacs so that you can predict the positions of Venus, and you can predict the position of the moon at any day or night throughout the year, and also work out the cycles of these things. So, for instance, Sin, being the moon, is also synodic and is also a sine wave.
I mean, one of the things that always, the language interpretation. Now we understand what you're saying. Some of the language interpretations, you point out horizon.
Yes, means Horus as being the god of time, the Egyptian god of time, plus zone. So it really means place of time or time zone. And the time zone is what you can see, where the stars come over the horizon, where the sun rises or sets.
The beauty of these discoveries, is that there are so many little pops that go along with it, such as the reinterpretation of horizon and reinterpretation of religion and the pinning of the cross, the serpent, a great many things. How did it make you feel?
I think I was surprised when I initially discovered it. I went and researched everywhere, hence the patents, which we started the conversation with, was to find out if other people knew about it, and there was absolutely nothing about it anywhere, in any research, in any book, or in any university throughout the world.
No university.
And of course, you can't grant a patent unless something works and it's provable and does what it claims to do, but also hasn't been done before. So it must have been quite a dilemma for the Patents Office, because in the patent I mentioned that this was probably used by ancient people. But they still granted it.
Just granted
I guess if they hadn't granted it, they would have said, well, we've got issues with what the meaning of the cross is within the church on a gravestone.
You kind of have official backing for even the meaning.
Yes, I do. Just by the granting of the patents, which are really the toughest review you can possibly have, because they're
so
commercial.
a lot of people apply for them, but they don't always necessarily get them, do they?
That's correct, because they say it's obvious or somebody else has invented it before, but in this case they chose to say that it hadn't been invented before, which kind of win-win situation for me either way. Well, yes. So really what we're talking about is a wheel. Everything in nature is a wheel, and then we learned how to measure moment by moment the wheel of the heavens and the wheel of the face of the earth, and measure time and try to predict it. Well, we try to predict it when we plant our seeds in the ground.
Absolutely, we need to, don't we?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, what you've done basically is shown an upright cross with the circle, but now, the mind wanders into things like Stonehenge and Avebury and a great many things.
Stonehenge couldn't have been created without a knowledge of the stars. And of course, Stonehenge then measures the movements of the moon and the stars and the sun. And I guess what you could say is that the cross is like a wristwatch version of Stonehenge.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing.
It's quite a step forward.
You've got the watch on your hand,
yes.
and it is basically Stonehenge on your wrist.
It is, in fact, Stonehenge on your wrist, and a lot of
It's quite heavy.
the SAS and military people are taught how to navigate using a watch,
Yes,
because they look on
yes.
it. Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
And this, of course, what they look at us where the big hand is the North Pole of the Earth, and therefore the hand points at the sun.
Yes.
And of course, one of our earliest clocks in Wells Cathedral is 24-hour clock, so it
But I
actually
never
does
ever
point at the sun.
clicked when we were taught, you know, to read the time from location basically from the watch. It was never ever taught anything like that. Crichton, thank you very much. After the break, we're going to get into some more of the sacred nature of this with some paganism and Wiccanism.